Wind is one of the most powerful forces shaping an ecosystem. And here on Pandora, it's impossible to ignore. Welcome, or welcome back, to another episode of Pandora through a biologist's eyes. For this episode, we're going to take a look at an interesting ecosystem that we have here, and that is this one. It's called the windswept grasslands biome. It is one of the biggest biomes that we can find because it is all over the place, like there's one here. So it's like a very large area that is shaped by the same characteristics. And as the name suggests, windswept, it means that wind is predominant here. So air being hard to see with the naked eye because it's like gas particles, we can see it if we look at the plant life. So if we look here, we can have a visual representation of the wind, which is first by the spores, the wind is blowing from those trees over there, but also we can see the particles of the grass flying around. Though the wind is coming now from here, going there, the trees are pointing somewhere else. So the position of the the position of the trees pointing over there suggests that the wind is coming from this side and then pointing over there. Oh, look at this. So here in this area, we have some very rare animals, or not rare, I mean they're kind of common because they're really hard to see because they're very quick and skittish. The blade-back lizard, I'll show you in a second. So those trees are almost parallel to the ground because they're being pushed over while they're growing by the wind. That is something, of course, that is happening on Earth too, although it's usually the trees that are affected that tend to stay much smaller, especially species in, let's call them difficult habitats, like, having strong wind blowing isn't an ideal growing space. So usually those trees, when you compare high elevation positions from trees that grow in harsh conditions, and then species that grow in, more temperate, less stormy ones, they tend to grow a bit bigger. There's those birches, if they grow up in the Arctic, they stay kind of small and shrub-like, but they can be like real trees, spanning a couple meters if they're growing in, Central Europe. So the wildlife is kind of similar to the other wildlife that we have all over the plains, which is arrowheads. Earlier we've seen some sound blast colossus in the distance. Of course, the dire horses are all over the place, so the people here, they have a, kind of like a horse culture. Of course, they have ikran too, but they do really also, have the dire horses around them and like to bond with them because they're like a good way to travel. Although being so shaped by wind, it might be a bit difficult for flyers because there are those areas with like wind tunnels and they make flying kind of hard.
I haven't laughed in so long, I wonder if my cheeks can still take it.
Yeah, it happened to me too. It's like when you laugh so hard and you can't just it's like your stomach starts hurting and then you've got tears. It's always good when you have fun like this. So what is noticeable if we look at those two biomes? The trees are still kind of close together, but this tree... Let's see if we can look at it. So, this tree species, again, the trees are still a little bit neglected. And they have a bit of, they get shaped by the wind like this. Then, of course, we have the shrubs, which are, shrubs are usually kind of hardy. They get more fluffy, so they can kind of neglect the wind force a little bit. But then we have these trees more or less right next to the other trees. Oh yeah, bladeheads again. And they don't seem to get pushed over by the wind. Which could be to them being in a position where it is less windy, but it could also be just some game oversight. That thing is interesting. Red leaves have adapted to better photosynthesize light while agitated by the wind, because if we use earth biology, reddish color in plants usually means that they function better under low light. So you can usually, again, it's usually the thingy to protect them from the, having either low light, or also what I've noticed with my pitcher plants, they tend to form red to kind of block the light a little bit if it's too intense. So usually reddish plants have a little UV protection built in. But it's interesting they say that, it's better to, while agitated by the wind. Wind wouldn't really affect it because the sun, the radiation would still kind of be the same, I guess. Alright, but what I wanted to talk about those trees. Oh, you can see it here, this tree is a little this way, this more goes this way, so they're all over the place. So here we can see them all pointing in the
You
same
see
direction. It's also interesting when we look at these structures. They have formed, usually structures like this, form because of erosion. So the wind is slowly chipping away the topsoil that is kind of like soft or brittle, and then only the hard remains. I think it would be like, the word is like butte in English, I think, or like a monolith, kind of like Uluru in Australia, or a lot of the mesas, the big tabletop mountains, are kind of like monoliths too, like they're harder bedrock than the comparing soil, so it just got eroded over time, and you've got those lines. Process is similar like with water, because air tends to behave a little bit like a liquid, so we have air currents. And it is really interesting. That's why you can, you know, kind of like see the comparison when you look at structures shaped by wind and structures shaped by water. As you can see, the plains are very, very flat, so the wind is basically flowing around, unblocked. And that reminds me, I think I should do a little for the people that just know the, you know, the basics, or like, oh, wind exists. So wind is, oh, please don't be mad at me. Oh, look, there's a bladeback lizard. Okay, so those little thingies are really annoying. It took me forever to find them. And they are really skittish, and they're really, as you've seen, very, very quick. They're kind of cute though. But it's really hard to get a good look at them. They kind of look like an echidna meted, echidna spoonbill, kind of like mixed with an amphibious armadillo. Well, anyways, wind. So wind is basically being created by differences in temperatures, so thermal differences, most basic. So you have like different temperatures on the poles, for example. They tend to be colder than you have with the equator, where it is warmer. And those temperature changes, they move the air. So warm air likes to go up because it's a bit lighter, while heavy air, you know, tends to move. And this constant movement is like a current. And that can be large scale, like we have on the, you know, the tropical, and more strongly the polar winds, which are, depending on where you are, blocked by mountains or not. Which is, if you're from the US, your mountain ranges go north-south in a line. So they're kind of like not blocking the cold temperatures, the cold wind coming from, or the cold weather coming from the north. So that's why if it's like there's a cold spur in the Arctic, it freezes all the way down to Texas. I'm from Europe, so the mountains here, the Alps mainly, they go from so east-west, so they're kind of like a line crossing Europe, and they're kind of like blocking the cold wind. So usually the northern countries, they tend to have a bit more snow and somewhat colder weather, while the countries, or like even the same country south of the Alps, the weather is usually a bit more mild because it's more influenced by the Mediterranean. I'm just speaking from my home, but that's usually, if you have something that blocks the wind, it's not as bad. And wind is just like small scale, and then you have like much more wind, and everything just forms the weather. So it's like a somewhat complicated process, but it all comes down to having different temperatures, and then it can be like a large scale, almost global. But it also can be like small scale, like maybe you've seen my little Weary Swamp video where you have the fog rising up. That's like small scale weather, because we have the little temperature differences with the cold water. And you can also have strong winds if you live near a large lake or an ocean. If you're near the coast, you've got the sea breeze and then the land breeze. Same goes for mountains, like you have mountain winds and then in the valleys, so it's just a constant flow. You also have large air currents in the atmosphere, the jet stream, which are all defined by temperature changes and different air currents that are due to those temperature changes, which is why in some areas you have more tornadoes forming, because if there's more changes there, so there's more air currents, and then they form different types of weather and different types of winds. So if we look at the plains on the map, they're kind of like in a bowl, and they're also kind of like elevated, so it would make sense that, because we don't see these areas, because usually if you have strong winds, if it's like flat and plain with no mountains blocking it, the wind kind of just like picks up and just goes down there. So usually a lot of the flat areas where people settle down, they plant trees kind of like to block the wind. And a group of trees is usually more protected because they're each breaking the wind than a singular tree. So you have Could also be an argument why those crimson trees are more stable. First of, they're near those rocky mountains, but they're also kind of like more grouped together, while those windswept trees, they are like single. Again, the animals are the same all over the plain. So we've got sound blast, we've seen bladeheads, we have the cloaked panthers here. Oh, I saw that little thingy just glitched there. But they're kind of tough to see because you see them and then they just run off, so it's really hard to look at them. Of course, we have our flyers that we have all over the place. Ikran are a little scarce here because the Ikran like those mountain tops, so they're grouping around those big mountains that kind of like stand out. Oh, there's my Ikran. Okay, that was a close one. What is interesting, if we look at this camp here, you see the trees pointing this way. So it means most of the wind is coming from this side, and the people have made their camp in this little protected area. So they're not, they don't have to suffer the direct wind. They found those little locations where they placed their tents kind of like against the wind, being backed by those cliffs there. Cliffs, hard rocks. Now if we look down there, we have a good representation of the wind. It's just blowing from this side, and we can see all of the shrubs move. And then of course those trees. It could be of course that some trees are more sensitive, kind of like I think it is willow trees. They're usually a bit more flexible than, for example, oak trees. So it could be they're also like more, kind of like biologically prone to kind of like adjust themselves to grow this way, while those trees are more hardy and stand upright. It could also be just because people developing the game thought it was cool. We never know. Here we have some dire horses just chilling. We've got those little poppy plants. I call them poppy plants because they pop. That's the only reason. I always forget their names. Oh no. And of course, ferals. Finally I got the quest. It makes it a bit easier to get rid of them when you have the quest, because it kind of like helps them stop it. But I've done that quest so many times and it just pops up over and over again. So that thing up there that the humans played, it's gonna have a tough time here in the plains because of the constant wind. It should be anchored to the ground a little bit, but it's not. It's kind of like floating, which is kind of an oversight. Again, I'm not an engineer, but they don't really have rotors, so they seem to be. I mean, the wind is pushing at it, but it should be, being pushed off because it's basically like a big floating balloon. It's just, a little bit of an oversight, I guess. Oh, look, I'm holding on to my... I think it's supposed to hold on to the little handle on my outfit, on the gear, but it looks like I'm grabbing the Ikran's kind of like the... I'm not quite sure what exactly this is. Kind of like a structure would be kind of like a cartilage horn, or if it like has some biological structure. Anyways, you shouldn't grab your animal's ears and hold on to them. I can see the animals being ready to spawn in and attack me. Those are the ferals down there. So another thing that is interesting, we are high up on this little floating platoon thing that the humans made, and it's not as windy up here, although it should be, because I don't know which one of you has ever been high up on a mountain when it's really, really windy, because it's like the higher up you are, the stronger the wind usually is, especially if the wind is windy down there already, so you would probably get blown off that thing. It's exploded. We also have a storm glider over there. Like if you've watched my storm glider video, it's Storm Glider Island. But here we can see all of the trees pointing in the more or less same direction, which we can assume most of the wind is coming this way. So the weather's changing, and that is one thing. Usually in open plain areas, the wind and storms can form real quick, and then you have things such as tornadoes that can form because they're the currents of the air, they aren't broken by trees or mountains, or trees, more like larger structures like mountains, I guess. So weather changes kind of quick and it can be really, really dangerous. Here we can also see how the wind, like same we saw with the floating mountain, like you have those waterfalls coming down, but they get blown off. I think that's a bit of an oversight in my opinion when they, you've got like a habitat with lots of wind and it's strong wind, the waterfalls wouldn't go straight down. They would be like blown off to the side, or whichever side the wind is coming from. Because the water disperses in the air and just gets, you know, blown to the side. Because it happens in nature, there's like some real nice waterfalls where you can watch them, especially when there's like strong winds going on. I think one of them is even in Yellowstone, Yosemite National Park in the US. I usually just use that because I mentioned the locations I've been to. I know there are some really nice waterfalls, like those narrow ones in South America too, where you can have that phenomenon. But yeah, here you can see the winds, the trees being pushed over due to the winds again. One thing that would make sense if you have like those canyon areas, that the wind would kind of like being funneled and being pushed like in a direction, kind of like a wind tunnel. So now we're not in the the different spot, I mean, and as you can see here, people also make their camp with protection to the rock. To be fair, the people are mostly out because they don't really have houses or strong buildings, so they have those tent-likes, and if the wind's that strong and, you know, blowing from all over the place and chaotic, it probably wouldn't make much difference if you were sitting in there or like right here. I'm on top now where the people built their camp, and we can see the wind is moving over this way. But when we look at those trees, they're also kind of like pointing towards this side, and over there they're pointing stronger to this side, and over there also this way. So the game is a little inconsistent when it comes to where's the wind coming from, especially in an area that's somewhat closer together. I mean, you could argue if the wind is coming from the eastern side, that it would, you know, being somewhat go to the side here because of that big rock structure there, but I don't know. Again, I'm not a physicist and I'm not a meteorologist as well. So I'm just, you know, doing it by looking at the nature, and the trees are all pointing over this way, and then they're pointing that way, and I see the wind coming this way, and the people build their houses to be protected from wind. Oh, there's someone up here, I didn't realize that. Did you see that movement I did with my toes right now? It looked weird. Huh. I like the colors here though. I really love like pink and purple, and those colors look really, really great. But yeah, then you have those areas with those little holes, and then wind should get funneled, which is why when there's like a big storm or like a tornado, you should not hide underneath a bridge, because the wind is getting funneled there and can kind of like suck you out or blow you out there. Okay, so I came here to show you something. In the game, we have those little air currents that we can see, like they're visualized for us to see. And we can fly in there with our ecran and kind of like use them as a... I'm going the wrong way, my bad. And like a quick way to travel, kind of like a jet stream. Although jet stream are really high up and they're just kind of like a lower air current. But I came here to show you that we have this gorge here, the Weeping Gorge, and the wind seems to be funneled in there and then just blows around and just kind of like pushes you out this way. And of course, wind can make sounds, which I assume in this game they said that they're kind of like named after the weeping sound, kind of like a mourning sound the wind does. The wind can howl, and the wind can groan, and the wind can scream even, because it can shake the ground, and wind is really something impressive. And people have been, you know, affected by it for like, not just affected by it, but also impressed by it for centuries, millennia even. And it is really interesting the way to, you know, describe it. Now we know how winds are formed, but back then people didn't. It's interesting that my ecran has a problem flying here, but those little coronis, they're just doing fine and they're flying all over the place, because if you've ever seen strong storms, strong winds, birds are really funny to look at, because then if the wind is really strong and they're flying against the wind, it looks like they're almost standing in the air. It's really impressive. I wanted to show you the air tunnel. Okay, so it's, you see, we see the large area here, and it's funneled into this gorge. And then we can see, if we look at this gorge, we have those trees, the rocks being very narrow, which would, pinpoint to having a lot of wind erosion down here. So at some point they're just going to topple and fall over because their base is slowly being eroded away. And then we go up this way again. What is interesting when we look at some of the other monolith hard stone structures that we have, they seem to be of a different harder material because they're not as easily eroded away. Because they don't have too many of those, grooves. Okay, we can see here the wind is also affecting a little bit that sound blast. And we can see that some of the bioluminescence in the grass here is motion activated, kind of like the blue tide in the ocean does. Like if there's movement, they kind of like start producing the bioluminescence, kind of like highlighting the disturbance. There are some great videos out there about like dolphins swimming through them. You can see like the outline of the dolphin in the blue bioluminescent light. It's really nice. So wind is also, of course, being produced by thermal changes from day and night. So sometimes wind is picking up before it becomes, like in the morning when the sun comes out, and the other way around. So here we have a great visualization, because there's down the gorge we have the wind band going this way, and then also the trees bending this way where the wind's coming from. But over there, it is going towards this side a little more. I mean, it is night now, but this biome is called the Wind Purple Steppe. And we also have some of the trees, even though they're like not predominant here, they're also growing in this biome. So those trees seem to be adapted to grow, in the open spaces of the plains, while those crimson trees that I was mentioning earlier, they like to be at the edges. We can also see those crimson trees over on this side. So it's interesting. So I think they might like to grow on spots that are, maybe protect a little bit if we assume the wind's coming this way and it kind of like blocks it and goes this way. But again, it could also be just game design. And of course, this is everything just speculative. I am not a botanist expert. I know my basic plants. I know basic ecology. And I am not a meteorologist either, and I am not a physicist. So I am not quite sure, but just looking at that, it would make sense to have like a little niche here being protected by that big, mountain-like structure, so it's kind of like a wind-shaded spot. But then it goes all the way there, which, shouldn't be too wind-shading, so I don't know. Just game design, I guess, at some point. And here we have a wind tunnel again. Going from this way, and then we can cut in there. Here we can see the color change. Everything is red here. Red bioluminescence. During the day, red plants. So yeah, even though the plants have less the plains have less of the distinct, or we call them the colorful, large plant life that we see like in the Kingler forest, for example, they're still very colorful. Then here we have some of the arrow deer again. And each of the locations in this games, they have those different clans, that they have their own different and unique cultures. And as you can see, as I was saying earlier, when we're talking about mythology and people, and wind, the connection between people and the wind and the narration. So they have those kites. They kind of like to see them in the wind, I guess, or harness them. So it's really interesting how the elements, or like even abiotic factors such as wind, for example, can shape people and people cultures, of course. So they don't just shape the environment, they shape everything. So this area here is interesting because we have these large plants that kind of like look very sensitive, yet they have grown to be quite large, even though they're supposed to be strong winds ongoing, which again doesn't really make sense. And they're nameless, even though they're pretty cool. They're pretty unique. But yeah, from what we've seen with the other areas, this spot doesn't make sense. Because there should be strong winds ongoing, yet those little plants that look kind of like sensitive, they are just like growing fine. Then we have these ones. So there it's interesting about, they say like, oh, it's like a carnivorous plant, but kind of like a pitcher plant in a way, but it also is actively grabbing prey, which is just interesting. But we cannot see that in-game. So I don't think anything's falling in there and that would grab it. So you can see the tentacles in there. But yeah, the game is sometimes a bit of, you know, kind of like it's saying one thing, but just by looking at it, it's completely suggesting something else. So kind of like having to saying, oh, it's a protective area. The protected area, the plants are like, you know, growing under those protected spots. Doesn't make sense because, as you can see by just looking at the structures, there's strong wind here eroding away the base. So it's kind of like, yeah, you're kind of like negating the thing you stated by showing something different. Again, it's fine, it's just a game, but I like to pinpoint it out. Strong winds again can be really, really tough for animals, of course, especially if you have like a big sail on your back like this one. So it would be probably best to travel with the wind so you don't get blown over, because if the wind is strong enough, it can topple something of that size like that sound blast as well. It's really interesting to look at the bioluminescence. A lot of the animals I've shown you are like that bladehead with the nice pink there. We've seen during the day. It's really nice to see them at night too. And now we can see it harnessing the wind. Well, I do hope you liked that episode and you learned a little bit about, and you know, you've got to appreciate or get to know how, you know, forces, of course, like in this case the wind, can shape an ecosystem as well. I've been recently trying to put in a little bit more of the, like, not just cutting to when I speak, but like try to keep in a few of the, you know, the locations when I travel as well, because that game is really, really great design. It looks really beautiful and colorful. And even though the plants are kind of like unnamed a lot of the times, it's still really nice to see them and that they put so much level of detail in there. Or you have like the environment interacting with each other, like the bioluminescence of the plants. And you can see a little bit of the changes going from day to night. Because I've been usually, in the earlier ones trying to just film during daylight. But I guess it's nice to see them at night too and see all of the changes, because the game, when with the bioluminescent, it's really beautiful. And you've seen the sound blast many times now in my videos. Or many times, a couple times I guess. But, you know, see them at night, and you know how the light changes, or the bioluminescent changes them. I mean, again, I hope you liked it, and I hope it's not too loud, because I have my fan on, because, again, I'm from Europe, and we have a crazy heat wave right now, and my room where I record is under the roof on the first floor, so I think for Americans, if you're watching this, it will be the second floor. So you've got ground level, first floor in Europe. And then, of course, we have, I think in the US, it's first level is ground level, and then second floor would be the first floor. Anyway, it gets hot under the roof, and I need to have my fan running, otherwise I'm dying. And my fan is cooling me with, you guessed it right, wind. So it's really nice to make an episode about wind and the windy parts, or generally the plains. I know there's like this windswept biome, but all parts of the plains are affected by wind, because it's the predominant force here. Because it's just like so shaping the environment. It's eroding the topsoil. It is changing the structures, and of course impacting the life that tries to settle here. Well, I do hope you liked that episode. If you're, you know, heating up like me, stay cool, stay calm, drink a lot of water. And, well, I wish you a great day, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Bye!